We'll see there. Hello, this is the People's View panel discussion. We have 4 people talking about the active legislation that's being proposed in both the city and state level. So I'm Carl Seidel. I served 4 terms, and 1 term being vice chair of the Public Works Committee, thanks to Bill.
Oh, I'm Bill O'Brien. I had 5 terms in the state legislature and did various things while I was there, and at one point was the Speaker of the House, and found myself surrounded by some really good people, including Carl Seidel. So that was an easy appointment, Carl.
Okay. Kevin Scully, former state rep and general know-it-all.
Okay.
I'm Doris Hohensee. I'm on the school board for 1 term, and I'm currently serving that term.
Okay, and then we're going to ask you to bring up a hot subject on the school board.
Social emotional learning. It's the high point of our strategic plan. Now, we approved this, I opposed it, it was 7-2 last month, and it was supposed to be free. There was free online curriculum, there's free professional development, and we just got our strategic plan, which I didn't participate in because that was taken off the board, and they had some committee, and $3 million they want to implement, and most of it is social emotional learning. We need a new assistant superintendent of teaching and learning. We need an executive director of social emotional learning. We need 14 new social workers. We need 10 and a half health teachers, plus community outreach directors. This is quite an expensive plan, and it will bind the future board. Our elections are this November, so you got a future board in here, and this is a human capital cost for 2019 to 2024. So you're saying that the next 5 years, that's the entire term they're on practically, is going to be prescribed for them before they get elected.
What's the procedure in getting this approved? This is something is slipping under the door, and
It's our responsibility as board members. I think it's even in state statute. But somehow our board majority voted to delegate it out, to minimize our voice on it. And this is what came back. We got a 1.5-page sheet last month, and we said that's not specific
Sufficient,
enough.
yeah.
So now we've got a lot of paper, and I'm really impressed.
Doris, how did we go through 243 years of American history without someone teaching our kids about social and emotional learning? Is this a Safe Spaces initiative, or are they learning not to be confronted with ideas that might challenge their worldview? What is it? I went to school, you went to school, I've enjoyed some success in life. I have a lovely family that's brought happiness to me, and I really, when I was in school, I really had to concentrate on learning to read and write and preparing myself for university and then professional school afterwards, and none of it involved social and emotional learning. Now, what's the goal here? What's the new problem?
It's a mental health program, but it's disguised as just behavior, helping them, behavior modification. But some teachers tell me, we do this already, but that's common sense at a local level. You're just imparting some wisdom to a child and helping them through a difficult day. This social emotional learning is aligned to the Common Core. It's a nationwide program. So it's going to be sort of imposed upon us. There's going to be data assessments where they're going to see if you have any growth over the year. And they're going to track that. And where's the security of that data? Are you asking parents if your child is going to participate? There should be informed written consent. If this was happening off campus, they would lose their licenses for doing this type of mental health intervention without informed written consent for these minors that are participating. I asked, where's the opt-out provision? Because we can opt out of anything that we find objectionable as parents.
there is none, huh?
No, because it's interwoven with the entire curriculum.
But isn't
Right.
Common Core something that we weren't supposed to follow?
It's
Oh,
voluntary.
Yeah, voluntary. They changed the
After we
name.
implemented, we found out that it was voluntary. So it works.
Well, I have to tell you, I actually find this incredibly frightening. Because I think what we're trying to do now is the state has decided they're going to program our children into a certain way of thinking and viewing the world in order for them to be, and from my perspective, more controllable for the brave new world that our
Right.
progressive, wannabe controllers or rulers want to have. They're going to turn our children into something other than what I think we would consider to be Americans. And now they want to charge us. This is insult to injury.
It's a pleasure to insult.
Yeah, so what was supposedly free now they're saying, okay, we're going to program your kids and we want you to pay $3 million to do it. I hope this is shot down
We've
in
been fighting
flames.
this for about 8 or 9 years, because we'd have language up at the legislature where it was values, attitudes, and beliefs, and we would strike that, because we didn't want any dispositions, we didn't want any of this in our schools. We wanted academics. This is non-academic.
Right.
And just keeps coming and coming at us from all different directions.
From an academic perspective, which is, after all, what their perspective should be, how are they measuring this? I mean, when I was speaker, I would ask this of so many programs. We had to cut back after 4 years of liberal overspending. We had to bring back that spending in line with revenues. We would ask the question when someone would come along with a program like this or others, how are you measuring success? And often we would find there is no measurement. And when there's no measurement, the program has no value. So and from an academic point of perspective, are there going to be more kids graduating? Are there going to be fewer kids failing one grade to another?
They promise without evidence that there will be increased graduation.
Is it measured, though? Have
there's
they
going to be a
established a
metric.
baseline that every year the school board can say, this remains a worthy program, in its philosophy it probably isn't, but this remains a worthy program and we should now move it along another year? Or is it just, we'll institutionalize it, we'll hire a bunch of people, you don't want to lay off any of those people because that's their job, and it just is a ratcheting up of costs that never go down?
When we approve a pilot, it's never evaluated properly. It's always permanent. So that's the scary part. But there's going to be a group outside the board, unelected, appointed people. They're going to decide what's developmentally appropriate or culturally appropriate behavior. Now, you've got kids on the autistic spectrum, and their behavior is not in a narrow range, it's quite wide. So they're going to be the first targets of this. And then you have to consider that it's a nationwide program. So even this ad hoc committee, are they going to set it, or is it going to be nationally pushed down on it? We don't know.
This is what I'm really concerned about, is we're getting away from objective reality, and we're getting into a situation where somebody else is going to say what the values are that everybody is going to be conformed to and measured against. Who gets to make that decision?
Well, the federal government's in ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, is saying that you can use these metrics for social emotional learning to show individual student growth. You don't have to show academic growth if you can show individual social emotional learning growth. So this is a whole new metric.
Growth into what? Who is going to decide what those metrics
Very
are?
subjective at the moment, but
And that's what I find to be so frightening.
Well, what's the procedure, though? Now, they are going to be asking for $3 million plus?
that's what's on the
And,
paperwork that I received,
Does
yes.
that have to go through a process that you vote for it, and then the aldermen vote for it, and the mayor has to sign off on it, because that's going to blow his budget?
Well, yes, you have to understand that we've already got contracts that are going to increase our budget every year for the next 3 or 4 years. Plus, this is going to be phased in over a couple of years. But the final budget would have to go to the aldermen. I don't know why they're giving us money to bind the next board in any way when a month ago the whole program was free and had no specifics.
Right.
To me, this is just like the full-day kindergarten. You know, here it's not going to cost us anything, and then ever since we've had to pay the bill. We keep hiring. We're short of para-educators, we're short of teachers, all legitimate. Now that we've encompassed this new program, we need all this personnel, but they sell it like it's not going to cost you anything. It's deceptive.
But somebody's got to approve this, and I just wonder what the process is and when it's going to happen.
Monday night, 6:30, I believe,
Oh,
in
really?
Nashua North, we're going to have a work session on this, and there's big public comment, I hope, if people turn out. I think there ought to be a separate hearing before we approve it.
Right.
You need a lot of input. They're going to say, well, we had a lot of input forming it. I don't think the people that came, the 15 people in 2 or 3 meetings for parents that they're pulling it from, plus all the other teachers and everything, I don't think they were asking for social emotional learning from the data I was getting. So I don't know. All of a sudden this arose fully formed, probably from somewhere out of the district, and this is what we need to do.
Well, I'd like to know also what happens if the child doesn't grow into the program that other people have decided that they need to comply with.
I know.
In
What if it
terms of the
starts
way
out
they
perfect?
think, the way they speak, all of these, I have to tell you again, this gets back to, if you go back to some of the, what I consider to be the more totalitarian governments in the past, one of the things they would try to do is to get the children and start to program the children to think certain ways because it became easier for them. I think it was Hitler said, who are you?
Yeah.
I have the children. In 2 generations, you'll
Right.
be gone and everybody will be thinking the way I want them to.
We'll
This
we'll
is-
teach them how to think from a social perspective, from a cultural perspective. What are the reference cultural values that they're going to impart?
It's unknown, because we have a lot of different cultures in Nashua now. We're
Yeah.
sort of a melting pot. But the scary part is they're trying to say this will help for violence in the schools, so little boys won't blow up when they come to middle school or high school. But if you're repressing even their feelings and their thoughts, because if you start this in kindergarten and first grade, telling them what a good thought is and what a bad thought is, they're not going to be able to open their mouth lest they get criticized. So there's going to be a lot of repression right from the beginning on even their emotions. It may blow up even harder and bigger than they thought before.
I find this so ironic because the current educational system has done their darndest to drive Judeo-Christian ethics and values out of the school system, and now they're going to bring something else in that they think is
Would be.
appropriate, and this is the way that they want our children to think. I want no part of this.
Well, there's even something in here that I thought was rather strange. They want to hire people that reflect our cultural diversity. So,
Will they be hiring any conservatives, do you think?
cultural diversity. I hope they hire some seniors.
I think not.
Because our demographics, there's a lot of seniors. Maybe they're going to hire some seniors. I don't know, but when you say that you're going to hire people based on our demographics, that seems rather prescribed. Rather, not the best talent, I don't know.
We have a motto for the United States, E pluribus unum, out of many there is one. These programs seem to ensure that out of many there will remain many. We're losing our societal cohesion. We had a cultural norm. The cultural norm was embodied in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and in a history of progress for further rights. We don't need a bunch of people to come together and tell us that somehow or another diversity, including that received from civilizations that in no way rank to the same value of Western civilization, has to be taught or honored by us. It's misguided, and I agree with you, Kevin. It's insidious and part of the leftist agenda to break down the family and to break down society.
Well, one of my favorite bumper stickers of all time, it said, Yugoslavia celebrates diversity. All you need to do is go look at the history of that country and what happened with all the disparate groups that they brought in. And once they lost cultural cohesion of the dictator strongman, it was chaos and civil war, death, violence, destruction.
And we brought in groups with a requirement of only one thing: adhere to this ideal of individual sovereignty and human rights. And Yugoslavia, for example, went the route of maintaining identity groups and having them be full of grievances. And the end result was they're all at each other's throat. Is that what they mean by celebrating the diversity? I'd rather be celebrating America.
Yes, yes.
Well, at
I
any
think
rate,
that's well spoken.
parents need to be fully informed.
And the meeting's going to be,
Monday, 6:30 at Nashua North
okay,
High School.
and this will be
boardroom.
the, what day?
Monday night, it would be at the high school
The
in the boardroom.
July,
July 15th?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, 15th.
July
That's right.
15th. And 1 o'clock at North High School.
6:30
6:30?
in the boardroom
Okay.
at Nashua North.
All right.
Well, hopefully people come and weigh in, because I think there's a lot of good common sense out there. And I think people get discouraged, and they say my voice won't be heard, or I'll be disparaged if I say commonsensical things. And our message to folks are, no, show up with your good common sense. Because you know what? You're going to know a lot more and have a better idea of how our children should be educated than some people who are vested in a new initiative that, by the way, will employ a bunch of them and their friends, and meanwhile pursue the current leftist agenda to tear down our society.
Well, good luck on that. And hopefully
Should
we
be
get enough
interesting.
people that'll come down and support you. And this sounds like something they're really trying to slip under. And I hope that the mayor doesn't approve this or get the board of aldermen to approve it, because that's extra money too, and it's a waste.
I don't think they'll approve this. I think they'll wait for the next budget cycle. This is going to be phased in. But this is supposed to tie our hands to say this is where our board is going in the future, which is unfortunate.
Okay. Well, let's start on another topic. Bill, you wanted to add something on the budget and how we did this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to congratulate, I think we all should congratulate Governor Sununu in vetoing another fantastically irresponsible budget that a Democrat legislative majority has put forward. It was so fantastically one-sided that they didn't have anyone on the committee of conference between the Senate and the House to work out the differences from the minority party, from the Republican Party. They basically jammed it through as all kinds of new taxes in the face of surpluses. There's a surplus that has resulted from the last responsible budget that was put together that lowered taxes. And as we know, when you lower business taxes, often you find more tax revenues coming in. It's come in, and they say, well, that's not enough. Let us have more taxes. Governor Sununu has done us a good turn in vetoing it. We're on a continuing resolution now. We've gone into the new fiscal year, which started July 1st. I think everyone should call the governor's office. Everyone should call their representatives and say, support this governor, support a responsible budget. Carl, when I was Speaker, we had followed another period where the Democrats had been in majority, and they overspent to the point that when the economy turned, but when we got elected, there was a $1 billion budget, almost 20% of the amount of money that was needed to continue their spending, not even increase it, to continue their spending, wasn't there. We had to cut it back. The amazing thing, as I view it, about the budget that they've come up with, it's just 3 or 4 budgets on, is this the first budget that would break through that ceiling again, break through that overspending ceiling again. It's not necessary, it's irresponsible, and it will take away the New Hampshire prosperity that we've been enjoying because of fiscally responsible budgets that have come out of the governor's office, the Republican office, and Republican legislatures.
I would say that budget, if passed, would almost guarantee that we would have to impose both an income tax and a sales tax. So what makes New Hampshire so different, special, would be gone forever.
Well, it's again a control system that they have. They're trying to put it into where they have you boxed in a way and continuing these things. I think that's one of the things that you saw in the budget way back in 2010 or 2011 when we did it. But there's no reason to do all these things that they have. They've thrown money at things without, again, bringing up a point where they don't have a measurement to see whether they're successful in spending all this money.
And they're wily as heck, Carl. They really are. So what they do is they try to come up with this narrative. They call it family leave. Or wouldn't it be nice to have a paid family leave if something comes up? And in their cynicism, they say, well, the way we'll pay for this is to have a little tax on payroll. It's not an income tax, it's a family leave tax. And the whole intent is to put together an infrastructure that says takes 0.25% or 0.5% of everybody's hard-earned wages and use it to fund family leave, even though the governor has said we'll put in a voluntary program, employers can fund it. It's not necessary, but what is necessary to them is to have that infrastructure so that the next go around they can say, well, we already have this tax on payroll, let's just put a 1% on it. And we'll use that to fund whatever spending that they can come up with a cute title at that point to cover.
And then they lose the control of it by giving it to a bureaucracy instead of the legislature.
And New Hampshire loses an important advantage in the country because we're recognized as one of the few states, I think there's only 2 or 3 states that don't have an income tax on wages. We don't have a sales tax. And you want to know what one of the most prosperous states in the country is? New Hampshire. One of the most socially stable states in the country is New Hampshire. If you look at all the indicia of social health, it's here because we don't overtax people. We leave them money to do for themselves, and people do a good job for themselves when they're let alone.
That's part of it, free choice that we really love here in New Hampshire. You have a lot of choice on things.
I can remember some years back there was a think tank in Maine that invited me over to speak. It's called the Maine Heritage Policy Center. And I did a little bit of research, and I found that right after World War II, Maine was a more prosperous state than New Hampshire. Its per capita income was higher, but we resembled each other in many different ways. They had the seacoast and all, which gave them better opportunities at the time to earn money. But our demographics, the mix of ethnic groups was about the same. Our industry, it was pretty much the same. And for whatever reason, we can discuss the reason, Maine went the liberal direction, New Hampshire stayed the conservative direction. We didn't enact a sales tax here. We didn't enact an income tax here. We had government that was modest here. Maine went the other way, and they have years after years, decades now of income taxes, sales taxes, government funding crises, and so forth. And so now you look at the indicia of social health, the graduation rate of students in the 2 states, much higher in New Hampshire. The per capita income in New Hampshire is much higher than Maine. All the other indicia, children living with their biological mother and father, much higher in New Hampshire. We have a stable society because people have imbued in them, you talk about culture, a culture of responsibility. I take care of my own. Our nonprofit, our religious activity is much more robust here. Churches taking care of people who are hitting on hard time. That's the choice we have. Having made a good choice in the decades after World War II to get us where we are now, do we turn to Maine example, or if you want to see it on steroids, the California or the New York example, or do we remain the flinty New Englanders that we are, who have a very prosperous society because we take care of ourselves?
Oh, well said. I don't know what else I can add to that, but do you have anything to?
I think people are going to start leaving if we get an income tax.
Well,
There's
the
no
irony,
draw.
the irony for me is we could have a Family Medical Leave Act right now in place, but in the last legislative session when we were there, again, they tried to impose an income tax. The Republican Party came up with a viable solution, which was private insurance. We had the amendment on the floor, it was there, and we'd have family medical leave insurance in place right now. All the Democrats voted against it.
But it is because, and you did a good job on that, and it's because you would take away their vocabulary, their narrative, which is not intended to get family leave, it is intended to get an income tax.
Oh, yes.
Get the bureaucrats in place who can start taking our income for state purposes and then expand it out after that. That's what they want.
You're absolutely right. They were putting the infrastructure in place to start the income tax. I call this the Trojan horse that the Democrats had pushed up to the walls of New Hampshire, and they were hoping we were going to pull it in. And thank goodness the governor stood strong on this. And I hope the people, again, Bill, you had suggested yourself, please contact the office, contact your local representatives, tell them that you do not want this, because nobody, I hope anybody who has any common sense understands, they're not going to stop
That's right.
at the 0.5%. Once that infrastructure is in place, there's always going to be a need, there's always going to be a new program, and before you know it, we'll be Massachusetts.
No other state can say that they came back and reduced their income tax after they started income tax.
They don't. It's just not the trend of events. What the people of Nashua have to realize is what the people of New Hampshire have to realize. In the final analysis, it rests with them. They have to take care when they go into that voting booth. You can't just assume because someone is a good guy or some woman is a good gal that that's the person that I want up there, because they're the ones, and I look at the Nashua legislative delegation, they're the ones that want to take your money. And they're the ones that want to destroy what has made New Hampshire such a prosperous, great place to live. And unlike overtaxation on a national level, on a state level, you're absolutely right, Doris, people will just leave. And we already know some people have left because of the tax on interest and dividends when they retire. They leave. We don't want that. We want this to remain a great state. And the greatness in part comes through our culture of personal responsibility. And folks, if you don't want your money taken for foolish reasons like this, get in there, figure out who's going to vote for it and who's going to vote against it, and then vote right.
Well, I think that Governor Sununu has done a good job, and he's sort of turned that. Now it's if all these things are going to be enacted that the Democrats wanted to put in, it's going to change back again where we're losing people. I agree with you, Bill.
Yeah.
Kevin, you had an idea that we ought to talk about. There are a couple ideas.
Well, I wanted to talk, we could spend I think we should spend a few minutes on the Gordon MacDonald, who was the governor's choice to be in the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And this is such a shame, because to me this is what I consider to be destructive partisan politics at its worst. Gordon MacDonald, and Bill, I'm sure you can speak more eloquently than I can to this issue, but seemed to be an I won't say seems, is an incredibly qualified man who had widespread bipartisan support in the legal community. If I can find 18 former presidents of the New Hampshire Bar Association and more than 100 members of the bar submitted bipartisan letters of support for his confirmation. You couldn't find a more level-headed, middle-of-the-road, I think, person to put on our Supreme Court, who I think would be somebody who would be he would stay to the letter of the law. He wouldn't be in there to try to exercise partisan politics. However, our executive council did
vote him
practice.
down.
They practiced partisan politics. And Andrew Valinsky, Michael Cryans, and Deborah Pignatelli, the three Democrats on there, despite the unanimous show of support from the legal community, voted him down. And so,
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, in full disclosure, I'm a friend of Gordon, but I came to be a friend of his through working on public issues. For example, about 6 or 8 months ago, I put together a panel of legal experts to deal with a Supreme Court case that had come down that said other states' taxation authority can reach into New Hampshire and compel New Hampshire businesses to collect sales taxes owed by the state's people. So if someone orders something online here, other states want to come into New Hampshire and require our businesses to collect their sales tax and send it back. And so, somewhat a complicated issue, but I got to tell you, I was thoroughly impressed with his participation on it. He's a smart guy, a knowledgeable guy, and what was clear when we were discussing these issues and the perspective he was bringing in and people he was having join the discussion, he was well respected over the other side. No one had then an argument against Gordon MacDonald, except the argument that Deborah Pignatelli came up with. And her argument had one issue, and the issue was he's Republican. That's what she said. She said, I can't vote for a Republican. Now, this is something that's never happened on the Executive Council before. Executive Councilors, there's 5 of them. They've always taken their jobs very responsibly, and they've viewed the task particularly of approving or disproving judicial nominees as one where you're looking at the character of the person, you're looking at the legal acumen of a person. You're trying to determine, is this a good, knowledgeable person? And no one, I mean, the number of former Supreme Court justices, the presidents of the Bar Association, no one has had that kind of support before. But like true political hacks, Deborah Pignatelli, Michael Krynes, and Volinsky said, we're not voting for this person. It was a sad day in New Hampshire when we had 3 executive councilors turn over to that one issue. I don't like the party of the other guy, the nominee, to reject someone who would have served New Hampshire. He's a fairly young guy in his 40s for appointment to the bench for decades. It's sad.
They've damaged New Hampshire, and they've damaged the process.
Yes,
It's terrible.
Yeah.
You had something else too you wanted to bring up.
Well, are we getting on the third rail here, which is woman's pay? Let's talk about that a little bit. This is kind of interesting because, again, congratulations to the women's soccer team.
Right.
Once again, they are basically world champions, and it was wonderful. From my perspective, though, there were some people on there, and one person in particular, and I believe her name is Megan Rapinoe, who was just so outspoken and anti-American. It really soured what should have been a universally acclaimed and celebrated victory. And part of, I think, the problems that she was having was she was saying that she was demanding equal pay. Equal pay. In other words, I guess the same amount of pay that the men's soccer players were getting. And this really brings up some very interesting issues here, because what is the job? Is the job the same? And should I would say if the job is exactly the same, then the pay. Well, the market needs to decide that in the end.
Right.
But what will happen is the market will level itself out in terms of qualified people will be people want to hire qualified people, they're going to pay them well. But we have a situation where in the Women's Soccer League, and again, there are differences.
Worldwide.
There are 2 genders, and they're different, and women are far superior in certain aspects when it comes down to speed and strength and stamina. I think the men have it over. So Megan Rapinoe, all things considered, she wouldn't even be sitting on the bench of the men's team. I mean, when you get down to the end of it. So for her to say that she claims that she wants equal pay as an athlete, then I'd say, okay, put yourself up against the best and say, if you could get on the men's team, God bless you, you should get paid. But that issue aside, the other aspect of this is, are athletes in effect entertainers? And who determines what the value of an entertainer is? And I would say the best and most unbiased way to determine that is how much money and revenue does that group, one person or group of people, bring in? And from that, you could say, well, if that person is making me $1 billion, guess what? They're pretty darn valuable, and they should be paid accordingly because they're making me money. According to what I've seen, there is an incredible disparity in the revenue between what the women's soccer leagues are bringing in and the men's soccer leagues are bringing in. According to the article I found, the women's soccer league in 2019, the Women's World Cup made $131 million. That was the revenue they brought in. Men's World Cup generated $6 billion. So it wasn't twice as much, it wasn't 10 times as much. The Men's Soccer League brought in 45 times as much revenue as the Women's Soccer League. So the question is, do you pay the women's soccer players the same when they're only bringing in 1/45 of the revenue that the men are going to bring in? So I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to decide, does the government step in and start saying, we know better than the free market and we're going to mandate these things? Because if they do, the irony is, I think they'll destroy the women's soccer league. Because if they try to force them to pay the same amount as the men and they can't bring in the revenue, they'll go bankrupt and the women will end up with nothing.
Well, I think that's with all the entertainment, if you will, types of, it depends on what the market is. And, the cities that have a bigger market, usually we're paying their people more money. And in general, men versus women, almost in all the sports, are like that, except maybe ice skating. I don't know if that's better. But what I'm trying to get at is that you can't control things like that when it's the money that is available that really governs on what the salaries are going to be.
Well, that's the thing, Carl, but people are trying to control that.
Oh, yeah,
And
and then
that's
if you
where I
want to
think
get to, just regular jobs and stuff, it's always hard to compare what Company A versus Company B jobs are in that kind of specific amount to see if people's pay are equal. I think that you ought to fight for it as equal pay if you believe that, but you ought to be able to justify that, the jobs are equivalent. And jobs are hardly ever equivalent.
Well, they are entertainers, and I suspect gender discrimination wouldn't be at play if Lady Gaga arrived in Boston and filled the Boston Garden and got a percentage of it at, say, 7%, as opposed to me getting 20% of the gate of some coffee house I go strum my guitar in. I suspect she's going to get a lot more money than me, and I wouldn't be able to point to gender bias. I'd be able to point to the fact that I don't know how to play a guitar and no one's going to want to listen to it. And Lady Gaga apparently entertains people, makes a lot of money for herself, her promoters, and so forth. So it speaks, though, this whole controversy speaks to a problem we conservatives have in talking to people about this issue, because the terminology that is used by the liberals is a friendly terminology and one that we understand. If you can remember your children, your children would come to you when they were small, and they wouldn't go, "Oh, Dad, that's not liberty. Oh, Dad, that's not free market. Oh, Dad, that's not the way that in the end we'll have more prosperity." They'll go, "That's not fair.
Yeah.
That's not fair." And so that's what we're hearing here is, that's not fair.
Right.
And as President Kennedy said during a press conference when someone started this, the great conservative Democrat, President Kennedy said, "Life isn't fair. It just is never going to be fair. And this illusory goal of fairness isn't appropriate. If anyone was saying that they couldn't get as much money as they can as entertainers because they're women, we say no. Yeah, that's wrong.
Right.
But they're getting as much as they can get for entertainers. They've convinced the people to give their league $131 million. That sounds like a lot of money to me. On the other hand, the World Cup, men's World Cup, has convinced the people to give them $6 billion. And that's the way. It's not a matter of fairness. It's just a matter of that's the economic realities of the activity you're involved in.
Well, I also find it interesting in terms of cherry picking what the issue is. Because again, if you looked at, say, the world of modeling, women are paid much more than men. So are the women who are walking down the catwalk,
That's a better one.
what is it, who's Brady married to? What's her name? Bunchen, right? Michelle Bunchen. Do you think Michelle Bunchen is going to say, I'm going to take a 90%
except
pay
Carl and I
cut?
haven't chosen to participate in that career. You could upend it. You never know. You just
Well, you
never
could
know.
bring it up. You could break the disparity,
Yeah,
end it, right?
we could upend it right away, I'm sure.
My answer is, if you feel you're underpaid, go look for another job.
Okay.
Or
That's what I
hire
tell
Lady
everybody.
Gaga for your intermission.
There you
Get
go.
sales going.
Yeah.
Be a little creative.
Yeah, I mean, it is entertainment. They get 20% of the gate, apparently. The men get 7% of the gate. Another thing I came across, though, is that there's been vigorous gains, as there should be if the circumstances allow for it, for women's soccer play in the United States. They're complaining about FIFA, which is the international organization. In the United States, of the 12 highest paid soccer players, those getting $1 million more a year, 6 are men, 6 are women.
Oh, wow.
And so there's no institutional discrimination here. What there is economic reality. And then, of course, this whole issue has become more difficult to talk about because I think she's a co-captain, you said her name. But
Oh, Megan Rapinoe.
yeah, is just wants to be kind of an outrageous person and has adopted the vocabulary of the left now, where she disparages our president and disparages our country, and didn't she allow the flag to go on the playing pitch there and all that? I mean, she's just kind of a disagreeable individual
Oh, yes.
generally, and
Yeah.
so it's easy enough to dismiss it, but this isn't something to be dismissed. It's just something that to look and see if there's reality behind it. The reality is they're getting a pretty good amount of the revenue that's coming in. If you want a percentage of $6 billion, bring that $6 billion in.
Well, I think this issue, too, is a perfect example, and I think you were touching on it, as to why I think conservatives don't do so well in today's 15-second of attention span, because I think you made a very cogent and reasoned argument as to why you can't have that kind of disparity. But it takes a while. You have to sit down and say, wait a second. And how do you compete against somebody who says, equal pay for equal people? I mean, boom, okay, so you have your 15-second sound bite. Everybody goes, well, that sounds right,
Yeah.
And then you have the one person who sits down and says, well, wait a second.
Yeah,
Let's work this through.
And so your little child comes, it's not fair, I can't have that ice cream. They're not going to be wanting to listen to the
Yeah.
problems with ice cream, a lot of sugar, and and this, that, and the other thing. And if you've had that discussion, the answer to it is, yeah, but it's not fair. And so, it's just what it is. And I think, again, it requires some sophistication on the part of folks who are listening, if they want to understand this issue and understand we do live in a very great society that brought us unbelievable prosperity. I mean, they talk about it's not fair that there's billionaires and what's Bernie's billionaires and billionaires. He used to say millionaires and billionaires, but then they found out he was a millionaire.
Yeah.
And so now it's billionaires. and who cares? I don't care that Bill Gates has
Yeah.
or Zuckerman has billions of dollars. I care about the fact that unlike my grandfather, I'm not living hand to mouth.
Right.
Unlike my grandfather, I was able to put my kids through college. We have unbelievable prosperity compared to what it was 20 years ago, let alone 70 years ago. It's a free market system. The market system that determines what Lady Gaga gets and what Bill O'Brien strumming on a guitar gets that makes all this work. And if you try to disrupt it, then you're going to make it all of us in the
Right.
end less prosperous.
Right. I think people have to live or at least visit some of the other countries around and see how people are more restricted than we are in lots of ways.
Right.
Lots of ways.
Look at a country like Greece. I was in Greece about a year or so ago. I spent a couple of weeks there. And a country like Greece has really kind of internalized that it's not fair argument. And as a consequence, they have robust, welfare programs. These pension programs are out of control for government workers and all. And there's an unemployment rate that's for young people approaching 20%. They have no vibrancy. In New Hampshire, we have a 2.5% unemployment rate. Basically, anyone who wants to find a job can get a job here, can get a good job here. And if you go too far down the it's not fair route, you're going to start saying, well, it's not fair somebody doesn't get $15 an hour minimum wage. Well, you're going to put people out of work.
Yeah.
There's nothing fair about that. What is great is that we have all these jobs and you can start building a career.
Yeah, how can we tell somebody else what they can pay people? People don't have to work if they don't want that pay. That's always got me is that, I didn't go in for the cheapest job either, but I went around and looked around so I could qualify for something higher.
Yeah, and so I must say the liberals are very good in choosing their narrative. They call it a living wage. The CBO just came out, I think 2 or 3 days ago, with a discussion of what a $15 an hour minimum wage, federal minimum wage being imposed across the country would cause. And they said about a million people would get more money than they otherwise are getting now in their job. And 4 million people would lose their jobs. 4 million people aren't worth that kind of money. You know, Seattle put in place a minimum wage and the restaurants moved out.
Yeah.
They couldn't be there. You know, you're absolutely right. And I have a small little business. I pay the people as much as I can because I know them personally. I consider them my friends. I want them to do well. But if someone were to come along and say, you know, you can't pay somebody $60,000, you have to give them $120,000 a year because that's fair, I'd be out of business.
Yeah,
And they would go to the true minimum wage. The true minimum wage is $0.
No job, no money.
Right.
I think I actually again, my goal is to try to come up with some pithy sayings that encapsulate ideas. And this is mine for the minimum wage. We'll give it a try here. If the cost of a job to an employer exceeds the value of the job to the employer, the job will disappear.
Right.
So when you raise that minimum wage too high, the cost is more than the value, and the guy's just going to say, you don't have a job anymore.
And the Congressional Budget Office just showed that. I mean, you basically, for advantaging 1 million people, you're basically throwing 4 million people into poverty. And our market system doesn't do that. Our market system will hire people for their value, and then they will increase their value.
But if the Democrats create 4 million more government dependents, they're guaranteeing themselves
Well,
4 million
run
more
out
votes.
of people paying it. Once
Right.
you use other people's money, you soon will
Well,
have.
you know, can't they stop though? Because aren't all the illegals coming over the border sufficient for their new voters, or do they have to drive people into poverty to get new voters?
Well, I wanted to bring up one other thing that was in the Union Leader about a month ago, a column by John Stossel. So many candidates have bad ideas. I think I couldn't think of a better way of looking at it. I don't know how so many of these ideas are grabbing anybody, Bill, except that, you know, they use the right words to get people to believe what they're saying.
You know, one of the more couple amazing things that I heard recently, and we all saw it recently, but my amazement was premised on a conversation I had with a couple, and I'll change their names because I don't want to embarrass them, but I'll call them, you know, Doug and Mary. Okay, Doug and Mary sat around a kitchen table with me, and they said, we've checked all the boxes. We're in our late 50s, and we've sent the kids to school, and we have a mortgage still. Actually, I have a new mortgage because we sent them to college. and they're saying our medical insurance now costs $2,600 a month, and Doug's had a heart attack, but he's okay now. The deductible is about, or the deductible, I guess, is $8,000. We're looking at that for the next 7 or 8 years of paying, you know, $130,000, $150,000 in medical insurance if we don't use it. If we do use it, it's 7 times $8,000, and that's assuming none of these costs go up, and that will bankrupt us. One sickness will bankrupt us, and there's a lot of things we can do as conservatives in reaching back over time and bridging the gap to a free market to alleviate that. But then they listen to a Democrat debate in which someone asks those candidates, raise your hand if you're for free medical care, for whatever euphemism they use for illegal aliens. Every one of them raises their hands and they're saying, what about us?
Yeah.
What about us? We paid our taxes over time.
Right.
You know, Doug's been in the military. I was a
Right.
military man, and we've done all we should. Why don't they care about us? And they are so far out of it. And the other example I'll give you how far. This is kind of funny. I was driving over to talk to a Republican group a couple of Sundays ago, and I was listening on the radio, and Planned Parenthood was having their national convention, and they had a little outtake from a speech from Joe Biden, and he's getting up there and saying, you know, I'm for reproductive rights. That's a euphemism for I like killing unborn babies. I'm for reproductive rights, and I'm going, oh, okay, and he said, even for transgender men.
Right.
I'm thinking, Joe, I think they're okay. And the amazing thing was, everybody's cheering them, going, yeah, for all these men, we need reproductive rights too. And abortions for them. They've just gone crazy. It's crazy times. It really is.
It is. And,
We
Absolutely
could use a little
crazy.
better history in our schools, that they would understand some of these differences between, these socialistic endeavors, how they've worked, if they're not worked. Our students don't know because they don't know enough history.
No, because they've been taught by, unfortunately, but not all of them. Some of them are very, very good people to hang in there, but too many of them, and certainly their unions, are very, very liberal.
Well, it's the textbooks
I think
too.
that there's an irony about the medical insurance, because if you remember, when they passed Obamacare, the Democrats passed that law, and they would fine you if you didn't buy medical insurance. These same people are now saying, but we're going to give it to illegal aliens for free.
Yeah.
You get fined, they get it for free.
And they get it for free.
And you're sitting there saying, when did it become bad to be an American? I'm getting penalized
Yeah,
here
so again,
in my own country for this? It's crazy.
Benjamin Franklin, when the Constitutional Convention concluded in Philadelphia, it's actually, as you guys know, but some of the viewers here may not know, it was drafted behind closed doors. And a woman came up to Benjamin Franklin and said, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he said, I've given you a republic if you can keep it. And the voters in Nashua and the voters in New Hampshire and across country have a decision that's in front of them when they listen to this. It's, do you want to keep it? Because if you vote for these people that are full of giveaway, slave reparations to the descendants of people who legitimately probably should have been given reparations when they're freed, but they're descendants, reparations to the gay community is another thing they're talking about. Wiping out $1.3 trillion worth of college debt freely undertaken by people who had enough smarts to get into college anyway. And this Medicare for all. We have $22 trillion worth of debt. These measures will put us into a financial prison. These measures will take away our democracies. These measures were not supposed to be those adopted by an educated population who wants to keep their republic. So think about it.
Well, good words, Bill. I don't know what we can do. We have to get people to wake up a bit. I don't know if we can get them to believe in some of these civic things that they should be doing, to get more understanding of what the true meaning of some of these actions are. Because, as you say, they're sort of lulled into thinking that's necessary, or that's good, and it's not good. And we're teaching our kids, as you say, Doris, all
Or
the
not
wrong
teaching
things.
them. Yeah, we're teaching them to be activists, and we're teaching them to use emotion over reason.
Right, right.
That's scary in itself because they don't have to do the research. They just have to tell you how they feel.
Right, right. And they get offended. I see these young college students who are so genuinely offended by being confronted with a idea that they don't share, or a belief that's different than their own. And I truly believe they are frightened and they are offended, and that's a failure of education. When I went to college, it was still at the point where they were saying, you're here to be challenged.
Yeah.
You're here to hear things that you won't hear anywhere else. And either understand that there's a better idea out there, or develop your arguments as to what you believe and why it's superior. These people, when they have their safe spaces and they have their emotion and they have their Antifa thugs that they're trying to keep people from getting on campus and going out in the public square and coming up with different ideas, I feel sorry, they're truly frightened. They've
They
been taught
don't
to.
have reasons to defend. All they have is emotions. So the only way you can defend emotion is put a tent around it.
Right.
If you failed in a debate, it was because your arguments were inferior. But they can't develop them. It's sad.
Right.
It's
And
very sad.
It is. And
Well-
then, And go ahead. Kevin.
Well, I was just going to say it's kind of interesting because when you hear what's being promised, you know, free food, free education, housing is a basic human right, you can start going down the list. And at the end of the day, what they're describing is all the things you get when you're in prison. Because it's all free and you'll be taken care of, but you are in a cage.
Do you remember that Obama campaign film, The Life of Julia? They had this comical life that from the mother's pregnancy with Julia to the death of Julia, everything was being paid by the government. And I'm sure the message was going to be, we'll take care of you, but the message should have been exactly what you're talking about. You're nothing without us. You have no opportunity without us. I mean, it doesn't work economically. It'll drive us into, Venezuelan state eventually. But it's such a sad way to live,
Right, and we have to convince Americans, reconvince them that they are better off with dangerous freedom than they are with the security of a slave.
And there's so many examples out there that either they are ignorant of or they just don't look at them that way. There are examples of failures on all these ways of socialism, if you will, or the government always knows better. It doesn't. We can do it much better if we can control our own lives.
Yeah, the most frightening thing you ever heard, according to Ronald Reagan, I certainly believe it is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help.
That's too bad.
We are the government. It's a self-government. So we need better candidates to govern ourselves better.
Yeah.
So that's what we need. People out there interested in running for office, people who want to try to change this ugly wave that's trying to overtake us, please get in touch. Come to our Republican committee parties. It's on the second Thursday of every month except July. And we will be talking with you again. Have your friends tune in to channel 96 to see the People's View. Thank you very much for listening.
That's a wrap.